This is the spoon from the Cheap Tools spoon carving video that I made with the 2 Mora knives. Today we're going to do some finishing cuts. We're going to get this thing all ready. We're going to bake it in the oven and it's going to turn nice and dark. And then we're going to use milk paints on the handle. Then we're going to burnish this thing and oil it. So if you're curious on any of that stuff, stay tuned. The first thing you're going to want, and what I recommend for finishing cuts, is a freshly sharpened knife. If you choose to go the route of finishing cuts and do a tool finish rather than sanding your spoon, you basically just want to go recut all your lines that need smoothed out. And we let it dry, and we don't try to get a super smooth finish when it's wet, because it's easier to get some of these trouble spots like the neck of the spoon and stuff while it's dry. So we'll get we'll start with the bowl, and we'll try to smooth out the bowl while it's dry. You should be able to get it smoother. Any rough spots that are left on this spoon, we're going to try smoothing out with the knife. Much easier to do when your knife is freshly sharpened. You could absolutely ruin your spoon during this process, so be very careful. And if there is a spot that you're getting to that you think you're going to ruin it, maybe just sand it so you don't lose all that time and energy you put into the spoon. So after you dry it, you want to do your finishing cuts with your tools. And then after that, we're gonna bake it. We'll go inside and go in the oven and bake this thing. I probably won't show you too much of me cutting this spoon, but I'm just gonna go through and try to recut and smooth out some of the wood. Now, you're not trying to take off a ton of wood in this process. You're just trying to do a surface cut. Just get everything smooth. And the idea is that your blade will burnish the wood as we go. I'm not too worried about doing the whole spoon, just the rough spots, because I'm going to burnish this anyway. And I'll show you that. But you're just taking off very little amount of wood. I don't know if you can see that, but just tiny, tiny shavings. Feel it with your finger. You don't want to cut too deep, dig into the wood, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So we're just trying to smooth it out a little bit. Get rid of any high or low spots that might be left. And when you're burnishing the wood with the knife or with the burnisher, you're essentially pushing all the wood fibers tight together. Just making those wood fibers that much tighter together. When you sand a spoon, you're kind of fluffing up the surface, and that's not as good of a finish to leave on a spoon for longevity. You kind of just want to scrape, scrape, scrape. You want to go around and micro chamfer all of your sharp corners. You don't want any sharp angles left on your spoon. So we're going to put this on a baking pan, and we're going to put down some baking paper. You know, the baking paper stuff. We're going to throw this on top of there. We're going to put this in the oven cold and set it for 300 degrees and leave it in there for half an hour. We'll get one last video of the spoon. Culinary parchment paper. We've got a pan. We've got a cold oven. We'll just use the center rack. Stick it in there cold. We are going to bake at 300 for 30 minutes. Alright, so I had to put it in for another 30 minutes. Alrighty, so this is taking a little longer than I thought. So I've had it in there for about an hour. What I'm going to do now is crank it up to 400, put it in for another 10 minutes, and just check it every 10 minutes after that. And hopefully this gets a bacon. It's gotten a tiny bit darker, but not as dark as I would like. Alright, so that was an hour at 300, and now we're going on to 30 minutes at 400. And now we're starting to get progress. So maybe 400 was what I did yesterday. So we'll leave it in there for another 10 minutes, check on it, and maybe another 10 minutes. Alrighty guys, moral of the story. I would probably bake somewhere around 300 or 400 depending on the wood and depending on how big it is. I would definitely keep an eye on it. Some wood is definitely going to bake different than other woods. Some isn't going to bake and turn real dark. Some isn't going to turn real dark. It just all depends on the size and the type of wood that you have. So here it is, guys. I'm calling it done. It didn't get as dark as my chip clip did, but it still looks pretty good. So we're going to let this cool off, and then we are going to proceed with the milk paints. So yeah. It didn't turn out bad. It just took a lot longer than I thought and didn't get as dark as I thought. But I like it. This was 300 degrees for an hour. And then probably another hour at 400 degrees to get it like this. Just keep an eye on your spoon. I would say start off at 300 degrees in a half hour. Keep an eye on it and adjust accordingly from there. I would not definitely go up higher than 400 though, in my opinion. So that's the spoon. And I would use reliable milk paint brands. Real Milk Paint Company. You can find them on Instagram. They're really good milk paint. And I've never used them, but I know people who have, and they're really good. And then there's old-fashioned milk paint. This stuff is not bad. This is what I have, and so this is what I've been using. And I'm going to do that color on the handle here. So we're going to tape off the handle. And I think that'll look really good. Alright, I would definitely look at the specific dry time, cure time, mix ratios for whatever milk paint it is that you have. I'm using Sea Green from the Old Fashioned Milk Paint Company. So I'm just getting my paint ready, and we're going to do a couple test paints. So we're going to mix it up. I probably put too much water in here right off the bat. You want to make sure it's mixed, and depending on how thick you want it or thin you want it, typically you want it to be creamy. This is a little too watery. That's not too bad. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more, I think. Let's thicken this batch up. And I'm going to have to go see what my dogs are barking at. Also, I think it thickens up if you just leave it sitting for a while. You just want to make sure it's really well mixed. And you'll probably want to do more than one coat. I'm just kind of looking for the clumps and trying to break them up. So I masked off the spoon. It looks like the milk paint's a good consistency. That looks perfect consistency. So we'll probably let that dry for an hour or so, and then do another coat if it needs it. You can do this thinner and make so like the wood grain shows through, and you can do it as thicker. You can sand this back. You can put this paint on and then sand it and give it kind of like a tarnished look. So yeah, I just kept mixing and mixing, and if you wait a little while, like if you mix it up really good and you wait like an hour, it'll thicken up. I probably did way too much water and powder for what I needed it for. But yeah, I'm gonna hang this up and let it dry. Alrighty guys, I just pulled the tape off. This is the next day. Just pulled the tape off. It's the next day. I was gonna do 2 coats, but I like how you can still see the grain through the milk paint, so I'm gonna leave it. So next step is we're gonna burnish this thing and oil it. And so you can use a polished stone, a ceramic. This is a polished antler that I sanded down. You can use one of these like polished stones as well. So when you burnish, I already did a little bit on this. This is just a little test piece. You want to rub it, and you want to make sure that you're burnishing. See how it leaves like a nice shiny right there? So it'll burnish the milk paint, but it'll also burnish the wood. And it'll make the wood shiny and compress all the wood fibers, giving it a really nice look, as well as pushing the fibers together. You want to make sure you're not scratching, whatever you're using, you don't want to scratch the wood or the piece and leave scratch marks behind. And I found that out the hard way. So this chip clip was my test bake piece, and then it was also my test for the milk paint. And you can see how it shines. See, that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want it to remove the milk paint. So that being said, you probably want to make sure your milk paint's nice and cured. This was also in a colder environment overnight. So hopefully I don't ruin this. This was upstairs in the warm. So I'm going to start by burnishing the bowl. You don't want to like over burnish, but look, see that shine? We've already got kind of a glassy shine, but it'll smush down any little bumps that are left over, as long as they're small. Help smooth out the surface of your spoon. If you're like me and I have some trouble getting the whole spoon smooth with a tool, the burnishing will assist. I did micro chamfer this thing, but I'm still going to hit where those corners were. Try to soften those and compress those a little bit. See
See that? Dull side, burnished side. Don't have to burnish. This step I like personally. I like the look it gives. I'm a little nervous about hitting the milk paint. Done it before, but I really like this spoon. Don't want it to ruin. So I think we're just going to do this lightly. See that? I'm doing much lighter pressure on the painted portion. For me personally, it just gives it a more finished look. The baking and the painting. Looks like more of a finished product. Looks more professional. So out of all the finishes I've used, I really like using beeswax or flaxseed oil. Either flaxseed oil beeswax mix or just flaxseed oil is the best that I've used personally. Always do a test run on your spoons, because some of this oil can discolor your spoons and make them yellow and whatever, and it just doesn't look good. But and make sure you let this stuff cure properly. Depending on what kind of environment you're in, it could take weeks. A couple hours in the sun would be ideal. Here's my beeswax linseed oil mix. I'm really going to let it have it. The only other step is to let this cure and buff it out. So if I decide to do that in this video, we'll have a little bit more of a section to go. But other than that, that's pretty much it. The beeswax linseed oil isn't necessary. You can buy it, you can make it. I made this stuff. But for the best oil finish that I've seen is this flaxseed oil. You could also get Real Milk Paint Co.'s half and half. Is really good. I've never used it, but I know a lot of people who do. So yeah, walrus oil might be another good option. Alrighty guys, so if you do just the linseed oil or flaxseed oil, you want to let it cure for at least a week. If you put it in the sun, it'll cure faster. But whatever the procedure is for your oil that you're using, make sure it cures all the way. So I did flaxseed oil. I had it out in the sun, so it should have sped it up a little bit. Did flaxseed and beeswax oil. So I'm going to buff out the wax now. And then I will let this cure for probably about a week before it gets any use, but I don't think I'm going to use this one. I'm going to try to sell it. So you just want to buff out that wax. Just buff it into the wood, and it'll kind of leave a protective coating on this wood and make it nice and shiny. I wouldn't recommend using beeswax every time you oil your spoon, but as someone who's making spoons, it works really good as a finishing product to just make it pop. So that's baked, burnished, baked, milk paint, and burnish. And I just love the way that looks.